Hello, everyone. Welcome to this first webinar and panel organized by the ALBA Network on navigating academia as LGBTQIA+ neuroscientists or brain scientists. As you may know, the ALBA Network is a network of scientists dedicated to increasing diversity and equity in brain research. And today we have fantastic scientists that have accepted to share their experience and the way that they have navigated academia so far in their career. And they are very welcome. I will have some questions with them. I will moderate this question. My name is Jordan Marrocco. I am a research associate at the Rockefeller University in New York City. And I will moderate this question, but all the audience, you're very welcome to ask questions through the chat or the question and answer panel in Zoom. And then with I'm sure the panelists will be very happy to answer your questions and share their stories and experience. So today we have here with us Ahmed Hady from Princeton University, United States, Bittu KR from Ashoka University in India, Joni Wallis from University of California, United States, José Peña from Einstein Institute, United States, Mehmet Kurt from Stephen Institute of Technology, Paul Matusz from University of Applied Science, Switzerland, and Sara Brownell from Arizona State University. So without further ado, I will let the panelists introduce themselves, their short stories, and then we can start asking some questions about their specific stories or what they would like to share with us. So maybe Ahmed, you can start.
Thanks, Jordan, for this nice introduction and panel. So my name is Ahmed Hady. I'm an Egyptian queer neuroscientist. I studied decision-making now. And the thing I want to share with you is I really don't see the difference between gay rights inside academia and outside. So in my parallel life, I'm a political activist. I advocate for Egyptian LGBTQ community so that the government improve its records on LGBT rights. And the second thing I'm really proud of is that last November, I initiated along with other religious leaders and activists in the United Kingdom a declaration asking for a universal ban on gay conversion therapy. So yeah, that's about myself.
Thanks, Ahmed. So maybe Bittu.
Right. Hi, everybody. It's always really lovely to be on a panel with other LGBT neuroscientists after the relative isolation from each other that we experience. My name is Bittu. I am a genderqueer trans man, and my pronouns are he and they, and I'm also queer. I'm now an associate professor of biology and psychology, so neuroscience and behavior. And I work on communication in insects, and I work on, perception of quantities and time in zebrafish as well. I also am, I would say, as much a political activist as a scientist around, trans rights in India, around LGBT rights overall, but also around other interconnected issues of caste, of class, of gender, of disability, and of nationalism. We are battling our own fascist-inspired, Nazi-inspired government right now. And I would say that often my own experiences of transphobia and homophobia in academia have been dwarfed by the political repercussions for the stands, around the government and around and its wider record of Islamophobia as well. Also transphobia and so on that have played out. We also find ourselves in particular positions that are interesting and intersectional given all of this, and I'm happy to discuss any of that, but I do find an important connection between this kind of work outside and inside academia.
Thanks a lot, Bittu. Joni?
Hi there, I'm Joni Wallis. I'm a professor of psychology and neuroscience at UC Berkeley, and I work on, I do primate physiology, studying frontal lobe mechanisms underlying decision making. So I came out about 6 years ago as a trans woman, and now work primarily on trying to tackle institutional practices that magnify gender bias. I grew up in the UK and did my PhD over there, moved to America to do my postdoc. I've been on the West Coast ever since.
Thanks, Joni. José, maybe?
José, maybe. Okay, I'm José. I'm originally from Uruguay. I went to medical school and School of Science there, and I got an MD and PhD degrees. I was a postdoc, got a fellowship to do a postdoc at Caltech in California in the late 90s, and that I felt really comfortable being a gay man in California. I'm more comfortable than in Uruguay. This and the good experience at Caltech made me change my life plans, and I moved to the US. I kept working at Caltech, and fortunately did well, and I was hired by Albert Einstein College of Medicine in 2005, a while ago. So now I'm a tenure professor there. My research is on hearing, sound localization, and I work on owls, like the picture behind me. So how the owls localize sound, and also we now work on humans too, and perceptual biases, etc. Right? So as an academic faculty, I've been working in many committees, right? Like quality of life, admissions, right? Diversity and inclusion committees, right? And promotion faculty, right? So all these committees take into account diversity and inclusion these days, fortunately. But in parallel to these academic activities, I've been working on LGBT groups for a while. Initially in the 80s, right, with the beginning of the HIV crisis, I became part of an LGBT group called ASEPO in Uruguay to support people living with HIV, right? In the US, I integrated an LGBT group called Mateando to support LGBT individuals from Latin America living in the US. And a few years ago, I started volunteering in a group called SAGE in the United States, which assists senior LGBT people. And I was just visiting older LGBT people that live isolated at home. I visited them, right? So overall, this has been my life, right? I'm be glad to be part of the ALBA Network, right? I was recently elected as a member of the board of directors, right? And I hope to be a useful director, and I'm happy to use feedback from you, attendees, and my colleagues, right? At the network to decide future actions that facilitate diversity and inclusion on LGBT, especially the LGBTQ community. So, thank you. That's me.
Thanks a lot, José, for your introduction. Mehmet, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jordan. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Mehmet Kurt. I'm a Turkish gay man, pronouns he, him. I'm currently an assistant professor at Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey, also an adjunct assistant professor at the Biomedical Engineering and Imaging Institute at Mount Sinai Hospital. My research interests are on brain biomechanics, understanding the mechanics of the brain in a lot of diseases like Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury, and so on and so forth. I also work on developing novel MRI-based imaging techniques to measure the mechanical response of the human brain. In parallel to my efforts in academia for research, I also work on bunch of DEI efforts. So I work with this UK-based organization called the STEM Village, and I would strongly encourage you to check them out because they're doing wonderful work, where we are organizing a bunch of events and initiatives to increase the visibility of LGBTQ+ researchers in STEM. So last year, for instance, we had a global STEM conference for LGBTQ+ scientists, and I think it was a great success with over 500 participants, and we received great feedback on that. And currently, a recent effort that I would like to highlight is I'm leading an effort to start an initiative called PRIDE, which stands for Peer Review for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. And the idea behind PRIDE is that volunteers will provide voluntary feedback, mentors will provide volunteer feedback to primarily LGBTQ+, but also other underrepresented groups in STEM for their fellowship applications or grad school applications. And we actually recently kind of compiled a pool of voluntary mentors, and it's on our website. If you go to www.kurtlab.com/pride, you will see a voluntary list of mentors with their expertise right beside them and their contact information. So you can contact them or you can contact me to facilitate that process. If you want to sign up as a mentor, even if you're a graduate student, you can be a mentor. Or if you want to sign up as a mentee, please contact me and I'll be happy to include you in that list. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here and I'm looking forward to the rest of the panel.
Thanks a lot, Mehmet, especially for sharing mentorship activity, which also ALBA Network is interested in. So this is also very important for the network that that is hosting us today in the FENS Regional Meeting. Sara, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here on this panel with such great colleagues. My journey is I was trained as a neuroscientist, and then I got really excited about teaching and education along the way. And so I transitioned into becoming a discipline-based education researcher. And so I'm a professor in the School of Life Sciences at Arizona State University. And now I explore how we can make undergraduate biology education more inclusive. And I specifically think about student social identities in the classroom and how that influences how they learn. So although I was closeted in undergraduate and graduate school, I came out professionally when I started my faculty position, and it's been really exciting to actually start a line of research focused on LGBTQ students and instructors and the decisions that they make in terms of whether they reveal or conceal their identity, and thinking explicitly about how we can make undergraduate learning spaces more inclusive for LGBTQ students.
Thanks a lot, Sara. And last but not the least, Paul.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jordan, and the ALBA Network for organizing this super important event. My name is Paul, or Paweł Matusz, and I'm a gay Polish psychologist and cognitive neuroscientist. I'm interested in how the brain controls attention across development and in naturalistic settings. I use EEG for this purpose. I study humans. And I link this with computational modeling and new technology. I moved around a lot, especially Europe. So I did my master's in Wrocław in Poland, followed by a PhD at the University of London. And after that, I did 2 postdocs at the Department of Experimental Psychology in Oxford, and then at the University Hospital Center here in Lausanne. And currently I'm a PI of a group here in the Swiss valleys. In my research, I try to leverage the important mechanism that attentional skills are in supporting healthy as well as atypical brain development, both as a function of regular experience as well as in treating pediatric disorders. I left Poland when I was 22. I was not out in Poland, as you can probably all imagine. Only when I arrived to London, I decided to be out, and I was out. But I wasn't publicizing this very much. And despite this being London and people usually being able to be themselves, in London academia of 2009, when I arrived, there were problems with LGBTQ visibility. So despite the vicinity of UCL, etc., and other colleges, universities in London and around, I could count the number of LGBTQIA neuroscientists on the fingers of one hand, let alone Eastern European LGBTQ neuroscientists. Yeah, so that was a formative experience for me. I've been a little bit shy with being open, so this is the first time I actually speak about my experiences. But in my hiring practices, I've been focusing on people from underprivileged backgrounds, and yeah, and I've been mentoring also the same folk, and especially when they were LGBTQ. Some of them, I believe, are in the audience, and so I'm here to represent and hopefully to be a role model for young LGBTQ people who may feel like they don't have space in the international neuroscience. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Very important to have you here, as Paul is having a Polish origin. You left Poland, and let's remind that the FENS Regional Meeting that is hosting us with ALBA Network is in fact co-hosted by the Polish Society, although it's virtual. I would like to start with a general question that is addressed for sure to all the panelists, and you can fight among you to who wants to answer first. So my question is, if you experience any challenges during your career, they were somehow related to your gender or sexual diversity. And I mean, during career, I include studies or looking for a position or in the lab or while you were building your laboratory. Anyone wants to answer first? Jose, thanks.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay. So my career, the challenges has been being an LGBT person is that it's feeling rather rare and lonely, right? Feeling that people didn't really know about my personal life, right? And having conflicts, feeling a role model, right? Just being a different person from most of my trainees and my colleagues. I sometimes have difficulty finding myself as an adequate role model, right? In the US, my life was easier, to be honest, than in South America, but overall, I felt like people didn't know really about my personal interest and my private life, and I was just had to be a good worker, a good colleague, and dealing with people that didn't really know my personal life, right? So most people were unaware about me. Also, I think, and it's something that I'm doing research now, so I think that I suffer what's called an imposter syndrome, right? Feeling inadequate, right? Yes. And having difficulty when applying to jobs to come across as self-confident, right, and person, right, and precocious person. So I had to learn to when I was applying to jobs, especially in the US, to look like that, right, to appear self-confident, and I had clear things of life. That were my challenges. Fortunately, now I'm doing fairly well, but I had some challenges and difficulties. Yeah. So that's what I have to say.
Yeah, thanks, Jose. I'm sure all the audience also will follow up with some of your feedback or stories. I see some questions already coming up, but we probably leave first the other panelists if they want to share their experience. Bittu, you would like to talk about something?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that I guess in my case, my struggles are far from over. I mean, it's actually really good to hear someone like Jose talk about these experiences, especially somebody much older than me, because it's reassuring to know that one's not alone. Because as he says, it is a very lonely path, and you know there are just very few trans academics out there, and certainly very few outside of the United States or Europe, or so when in each of our contexts we tend to be alone and feel very alone. I was always out. I think, I mean, at least there are different experiences of being trans, but for me at least, it was always something that was like obvious to everybody. The fact that but I think that was useful for me to always be out, because that meant that, so I came to the US for my PhD. I did my PhD at Harvard. And, you know, it was useful, I think, that I was out here before I came to the US, because it, you know, often one travels for grad school when one's away from home, that's when one comes out. Being out before and never really being in some sense in, gave me an opportunity to sort of experience really the environment here and there. And the one point I would like to make, because I think this is important, especially given the sort of the global colonial narrative that gets attached with LGBT rights, to say that in many ways I found, in some ways I found India to be a better environment as an LGBT scientist than the US. And in other ways, it's the other way around, right? And part of the reason that I found India to be a better space is simply because of the historical activism of largely trans women, working class trans women in this context, who've just visibilized transness in the Hijra and Kinnar communities such that nobody in India thinks that LGBT people are unnatural or don't exist, right? We're everywhere, especially as trans women. Trans men are quite invisible in comparison, but there's a reference point to work from, which is, and so for that reason, I found a great deal of acceptance as a trans person here of a kind that I didn't find. I found extreme transphobia in the context of the US. But of course, sexuality is something that one should not talk about in India. So sexuality is deeply invisibilized. And that means that I'm never asked about my sexuality, but also people don't want to hear about it, right? So people don't want, like, you know, if I bring up my partner, or if I bring up the fact that I'm queer, you know, it's just immediately an uncomfortable conversation. But as a trans person, then transitioning names on publications, you know, feeling safe enough to do that, worrying about the consequences of also fighting the government and governments on other issues, and therefore always having a measure of job precarity that comes from the possibilities of being arrested, right? I mean, these are the kinds of challenges that continue to make it precarious. To even so in some sense, one's trusting the world with saying, look, I'm going to have 2 names on my publications, and I'm hoping that, you know, people are not going to pretend that I'm not the same person before and after, right?
Yes.
Such a change.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. This is a very interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. This is a very interesting point of view because it intersects cultural background in different places, and I'm sure this is also a basis for a further discussion also with a fantastic audience that is in the background. Sara, you raise your hand.
Yeah, I think something that a lot of LGBTQ neuroscientists experience, especially when you're, you know, thinking about applying to jobs or, you know, or going through various training programs or even going to conferences, is, you know, navigating that challenge of this is in some cases an invisible identity, and you're constantly going through that decision of coming out, right? And you know, I think sometimes we think of, you know, coming out as a single point in time when you start to become out, but the reality is we have to come out constantly, right? Multiple times, sometimes a day, right? To different people. And, you know, we have to deal with the reactions of those people, whether it's surprise, whether they get uncomfortable, et cetera. And so, you know, I think acknowledging that there's that extra level of cognitive load. And I remember particularly when I was interviewing for faculty positions, I really wanted to make sure to come out at some point because I wanted to see people's response, and I wanted to make sure I was going to be in a space that was going to be accepting of me being out. But like, I almost would spend the entire interview debating when the right time was to actually come out. And so, you know, I think that that's just a reality of how it is. I will say that most of the time in the United States, when I was interviewing for positions, you know, the responses of people were totally fine. And this actually echoes some of the research we've done on decisions instructors make about whether they reveal their identity to students. Often some of the concern about it being inappropriate or about people's responses is actually, it doesn't actually come to fruition. It's not warranted, but there's still that fear there, right? And that still can have a negative impact on LGBTQ individuals when they're going through these kind of major events.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, Sara, for sharing this. And Joni, maybe you wanted to share something with us.
Yeah, so I was just reflecting on, you know, it took me a long time to come out. You know, I didn't come out until the age of 40. So I essentially didn't come out until I was a tenured professor. But you know, looking back on it, there's definitely this sort of tension within science between the individuals, right? So individual scientists tend to be progressive and liberal, at least in the US and Europe, and you don't get, there's no sort of intellectual pushback on you being LGBT. But we're embedded in this institution that's kind of deeply conservative and deeply traditional. You know, I was what would now be described as genderqueer when I was an undergraduate. But then I went to do my PhD in Cambridge, you know, this 800-year institution where people would dress up in gowns for dinner, and that sort of conservative, traditional, you know, oppressive atmosphere is not particularly welcoming for LGBT people, and you know that's true in the US, the institutions here as well, and just the way we, you know, science is just so attached to its history, understandably, but yes, that is a very white male history, and it's oppressive to us people.
Yes, thanks, Joni, and then definitely we do see a common thread among the panelists about their stories, and some threads are unfortunate, and we here to discuss that. And I move from that by probably asking some of you if you have seen any changes from today, if you've seen any changes from compared to when you started your career. So it's important to see, well, has anything evolved towards like getting better or worse? It depends on your experience. Yes, Mehmet.
So what I can say is I have seen some, so obviously I think it is impossible to speak on behalf of every identity in our community. So just to kind of piggyback on the previous question, and I will kind of like tie it up with this one. So I'm a gay cis man, right? And as a gay cis man, I had arguably less difficulties in academia because everybody assumed that I was straight. And to that effect, I guess I had the same struggle as Sara, like coming out like multiple times, right? And that is definitely exhausting. And I think the other thing, like just from a DEI efforts perspective, the other reaction that I previously saw in people was, as you know, I'm very passionate about visibility of LGBTQ+ in STEM, and the need to do that was needed to be justified to some people, because some people just didn't believe that, you know, why, like, is there even evidence of, right, LGBTQ+ underrepresentation in STEM? And I think that is changing, and I'm not sure if it's a genuine change. You know, obviously institutions are now, it's the hype of the institutions to, you know, increase DEI efforts in all aspects. And that's a positive thing and it's a good thing, but I hope that it's not a trend and it, you know, it is a sustainable effort. And I think that is something that we are yet to see. I'm not sure if that's the case. So that's the change that I've seen. I think maybe mine started to change a little bit, especially with regards to DEI, but obviously, this doesn't necessarily reflect to personal level interactions for a lot of people in our community. I think that's different, right? That's more granular and that's different. But that's kind of like what I've seen to be changing in academia.
Yeah, thanks, Mehmet. Maybe Paul wants to answer some of these.
Yeah, I'd just like to build on the fantastic answers that have already been provided. I'll actually just would like to make a specific point. I think what has changed between when I was starting at academia and now is actually the presence of Twitter and academic Twitter. I think for several of the panelists who are also active there, I think it's made to me at least, it made a huge difference in terms of feeling less alone and feeling more connected, and also identifying informal, well, people with which I would form informal networks of support. So for all the people who are feeling alone in the audience and think that they are just there alone, please go on Twitter and follow us and see who we follow and who we interact with, and trust me, you're gonna feel much better, even if you're, you know, in a country where it's difficult to be open.
No, but this is fantastic, Paul. Thanks a lot, because I see some questions coming from trainees. Some of them ask for advice, and this is like definitely something we should take into account about during our comments and during our discussion today, and probably connect your advice with what you see, your advice for students and trainees in the workplace. And how, if you have seen any changes now, and what would you suggest to them? That there are some questions coming that I will be able to then ask you. Then who would like to answer about what has changed today, and what is your suggestions for trainees? Yes, Jose.
So I agree with the changes that my colleagues mentioned. Yeah, I think that across institutions now, even the leadership is trying to promote diversity and inclusion. Promoting diversity and inclusion is not about all being equal. I think it's related to one of the questions in the chat, but about being able to be different but having equal opportunities, which I think is
it's the difference between equity and equality. Exactly.
Yeah, so, exactly. So it's about being able to be different. We don't need to be all equal, but we can be different, right? And that across institutions and leadership is working on that, and they're also training us as faculty, right, to be aware of unconscious biases, right, and all these things, which is, I think, is a good thing, and it's also in promoting. Every committee has to take into account diversity and inclusion when we admit students for programs, or we promote faculty and we recruit faculty. So I think that is a good thing, a good change in academic institutions.
Yeah, thanks, Jose. And I think you answering also, one question that asks, what would you opt for promoting tolerance, acceptance for everyone rather than promote equity understood? And I would like to, I personally have a comment on that. I think the term tolerance is a term that I've never shared, or I've never really embraced, because tolerate someone is always like something like, I have to tolerate someone, but you have to actually accept or endorse or support. So that's a personal, I'm a moderator, but that's a personal point of view on one of the questions that I see in the chat. Joni, about there was a parenthesis of what I saw there.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I agree that the DEI efforts are, definitely more visible and more important institutionally, particularly in the US. I just want to acknowledge also, though, that the LGBT community is in a strange place with those efforts, right, compared to race and gender. So, there are federal mandates on race and gender and efforts to improve, race and gender equity. And that sort of filters down institutionally as well. Race and gender of students is constantly tracked. LGBT kind of falls through the cracks there. And, there are some difficulties. Sometimes LGBT identities are a little bit more fluid, maybe, than other identities. But it does put you in this difficult position where you're getting sort of the tax of being a minority. I end up on all the DEI committees and, DEI assignment things, and yet you don't get any of the benefits, right? You don't get anybody actually paying attention to our community and trying to, increase its representation. So yeah, there's been improvements, but there's definitely some unique challenges to our community.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Joni. Yes, thanks. So the question could be answered by anyone, of course, but ask regarding what Pavel said about creating networks on Twitter and so on. My question is, there is any specific outcome through these media? I think sometimes younger people need to hear about the specificity instead of the general networking answer.
Yeah, so I think what to build on what José said about those programs, about DEI, and also about what Joni said regarding being on those DEI committees. I think real change will be driven by actually senior academics and academics in power actually not just mentoring or informally or more formally mentoring people from underprivileged backgrounds, but rather doing the so-called sponsorship. So actually, when you bring someone under your wing, you propose them for different awards, for different positions. You write the letters. You actually go the whole mile, rather than this not extremely well-defined mentorship, because that actually sometimes it might not bring the real results. And referring to what Joni said about those DI committees, I think, again, for younger trainees or people that are getting more and more senior in academia, I think the change you bring as mentors, de facto mentors or direct academic mentors, is not by putting people from underprivileged backgrounds in DI committees, is in actually putting them on committees of importance that are bringing up their prestige and hence exactly addressing equity. We should not be on DEI committees. It should be the people who have had the privilege before to be doing the homework, educating themselves, and then giving back to the community. I was almost recently put forward for a DEI, I'm so sorry, panel, and
all the acronyms are.
And I refused because I said this is not what a person should be, a mentor should be doing. Please put me forward for a different committee when I actually can be getting those opportunities that I've been left out of.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I do share your thoughts. Ahmed?
Yeah, we have been focusing on the representations of LGBT in academia. There is also the aspect of the science itself, especially now in the trans issue specifically. It's at the forefront, and we have to work on the way we use sexist and gender language in the publications itself, the heightened turfiness of some research, and use turf is a trans exclusionary radical feminist. There is a whole war now outside and inside of academia to exclude trans women who are, some say are not women. And I feel that we have a responsibility to also in the science itself, to not only the representation, but in the practice of science and research itself, to really confront the science that is preventing access to medication, to transition, and especially in the UK have a very bad now record on banning pre-puberty transition and other stuff. So we have to be, I feel like the gay issues specifically are sealed in the law, in the federal law, but the trans issues I think should be our priority now.
Yeah, and I've heard even in Sweden something like this. Yeah, Bittu, I saw you raise your hands.
Yeah.
We'll try, yeah. We have 20 minutes left in our discussion. We have lots of questions from the audience as I would like to go over also, but let's go because I love this interaction and I love how you're answering yourself and the others. So.
Yeah, I saw a lot of questions in the chat box which were worth responding to, but jumping off of what Ahmed said, I think that, to answer that first question about tolerance and acceptance and equity, many of these are premised on the idea that we as LGBT people are asking for inclusion in the rotten system that is white dominated, cishet dominated, really wealth dominated, academia. And I think that is not what I'm doing, at least. What I would like to do is say, as somebody who has had the experience of some kinds of exclusion, not others, I would like to change the mainstream, right? I'm not asking for the mainstream to continue being horrid and accept me. I want the mainstream to change. I think the mainstream, I want to be a mirror to the mainstream to say, you are rotten on the inside, right? And that is very much true of the practice of science, and that is, and the history of science. And so I think that, there is a lot of examining the practice of science. We as scientists often are anti-authority, but we're reading text, all of the textbooks which come to us to teach are mentioning this father figure and that father figure, all cishet white men. And, the practice of science continues to be stronger where wealth is concentrated. These are all serious problems. And I think in some ways there are, the lockdown and so on has changed some of this. We have online meetings now, yes. And that's completely changed visibility and just the ability to even connect with all of you for people like me. So I think that it's important to think about many of these structures. And there were a couple of questions about, would it have been different if one wasn't as successful, does one's success affect one's decision to come out? I find that if one's worrying, I think about success, which is again defined in this very ableist, very capitalist way, right? If one is worrying about that, right, one is buying essentially, I think, a ticket to a very sort of internally conflicted and sad place, right? And so, everybody's answer to this question of how to navigate your particular position will be different. But for me, it's just cognitively easier for me to say, I'm not negotiating with myself about how much I'm going to repress myself. There's enough people out there who want to put me down. I'll leave that job to them. And, that doesn't mean that I don't battle my own imposter syndrome and so on, but I try to be on my side to the extent that I am cognitively aware of it. Yes. And there was a question on specific networks. So I just want to say that in the context of India, we're now actually largely driven by young queer and trans people, with creating just the space and this visibility. Just so many young queer and trans kids are coming out. Many of I think are on this call as well, and we now have some networks largely on WhatsApp so that people can participate anonymously. But please feel free to reach out to me. We'll try and put some more of these efforts on the internet so that and streamline the ways in which people can get involved. But please do feel free to reach out to me, especially if you're in India or in the diaspora. And I would really like for all of us to be better connected with people from other countries. And I think now is really the time to do that, right? As we become more and more connected, and hopefully as we move away from the practice of global warming heavy sort of flying to conferences in the US and UK and Europe. That's it from me.
Thanks, Bittu. Thanks for also reading the questions that you were doing. Because I would like to dedicate the last 15 minutes to a matter that I saw in the chat that I know Ahmed is very interested in, and I saw some of the questions. So in general, we have trainees who are asking, so I'm applying to graduate school this year. How do you think I should navigate sharing my identity when interviewing in areas with laws that are harmful to LGBTQ+. There is another medical student from Turkey and who would like to know your feedback and thoughts about that. But this goes also in the area of what about organizing conferences, meetings and everything in LGBTQIA+ free areas. And I know we have briefly discussed with Ahmed about this. We have some questions about this in the audience. So this can apply for sure to organizing meetings or organizing meetings or applying for schools or anything that it includes LGBTQIA+ free areas, and how to navigate in the world of professional approach. Ahmed.
So disclaimer before what I'm going to say is a personal opinion, and you take the advice with a grain of salt. If we
like personal opinions, if we would like the other ones to
I hope so.
Even you, it's even better.
So if the conference was organized in an LGBT free zone, I will get my rainbow flag and just go to the conference. And confront the reality. I'm not gonna allow anyone to repress my identity. Given my background, I was out in Egypt, which is an extensively Islamic conservative country. I was also exposed to a lot of dangers there, but I feel if we allow governments who pass homophobic and anti-LGBT laws like Hungary, Poland, and I'm sure it's gonna spread around.
Even states, there are, we also have.
Some states, I feel like, okay, you can apply pressure on them, but there is also the local communities that needs to feel supported. But in the same time, I understand the dangers of being in such a situation, but that's what I will personally do. In applying for jobs in areas that have laws that are against LGBT, I think you should again be open about your identity in the job itself, application, but concerning living there, you have to try it yourself, whether it's the laws are really being applied or not, or it's just some political propaganda.
Okay, so you are for encouraging people.
Yeah, of course. And make it very visible, actually. More visible, like have rainbow flags flying.
Go ahead and fight. What about Sara? What do you think about all this?
Yeah, so I have pretty much the opposite view. I think that organizations can use financial pressure by specifically avoiding places that are not going to be inclusive for transgender individuals, for LGBTQ individuals. And I also really worry about trainees that are less comfortable coming into a situation and carrying a rainbow flag. Do they choose to not go to that conference? And then do they miss out on those professional opportunities? So non-LGBTQ individuals get to go to that conference, get to make those connections, get to present their work, right? And so are there career limitations. So I strongly advocate that organizations can explicitly choose to hold their sessions in LGBTQ friendly places. And if places are not friendly, then pull the funding.
Thanks, Sara, for sharing an opposite view. Joni, what do you think? You want to?
Yeah, so I agree with Sara.
You agree with Sara?
Somewhere like SFN will bring in tens of millions of dollars into a, into a city's finances. Scientific conferences are big, financial inputs into local economies. And I don't think we should be supporting local economies that, aren't inclusive for everyone. And so as a senior scientist, I've had locations of meetings change because I refused to go. I've had NIH study sections, the locations changed because I refused to go. California maintains a list of states that have discriminatory practices against LGBT people. I think it's now 14 states in the US are on that list. And the law is that a California employee cannot be forced to go to any of these states for a professional reason. So, that's what I use. I refuse to give talks at those states. And usually the person who invites me, I tell them to tell the senior leadership at the university that I'm declining the talk for that reason. Change in these places is really only going to come about. We can't do it ourselves, right? It's the people within that state that can make that change. All we can do is explain to them, that the bigotry has consequences much more broadly than simply, the minority of people that you're targeting within the state.
And your suggestion, Joni, is also for students applying, for example, in different states or whatever. It's not only for
I'm saying as a senior scientist, I'm in a position to change it. I understand that you have to make compromises earlier in your career, but I feel like once you get to our position where we can pick and choose, it's our responsibility to really to fight that battle for the junior people, to try and make sure that they don't have to make those compromises, right? Because the meetings are in places that are safe for them.
Thanks. Mehmet, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, so for conference locations, I completely agree with Sara and Joni. I will just add a point because there was a question about grad school applications, whether how, one should navigate around their gender or sexual orientation identities. In my opinion, so I'm talking about this specifically from a US point of view. So this is going to be a different experience in other countries. So this is just a reflection of the US. Last year's Supreme Court decision extends the Civil Rights Act in the case of employment to gay and transgender people. So if you shouldn't try to hide your identity. I think if you, for example, if you attend an interview and if this comes up, and if you feel like you have to hide your identity, actually, that place is probably not for you. I think you should look at it from this point of view. So, and obviously I know like there's a debate about whether that Supreme Court decision really covers everything. It doesn't. That's why we have to advocate for the Equality Act, which I believe passed the House, but we need to pressure the senators to pass the Equality Act for expanded protections for our community. But for specifically for graduate school applications, I believe that you shouldn't have to feel like you have to hide your identity. And if that's the case, I think that institution is not for you.
Thanks. Paul.
I will just very quickly build on what Mehmet said, but also fantastic points before, also by Joni. I agree that if you feel like you can't be yourself at a specific institution, then you should probably leave. But sometimes people don't have a choice. Sometimes opportunities are limited. So in this case, I think what you should guide yourself by as a person who is making a decision as to whether come out or not is your safety. So judge the risk, judge the cost and benefit. If there's a place that maybe will be a stepping stone for you, maybe it's easier just to stay in the closet for a bit if there are no other opportunities. But first and foremost, safety, I think is personal safety is very important. So also bear that in mind. As people, LGBTQ people still get attacked, and and trans women are those who get disproportionately most murdered in the States and everywhere else. So safety is an important concern. As for conferences in places that are not LGBTQ hospitable, I agree with Joni that one should be hitting them where it hurts. So taking the example of very jolly towns and mainly towns in Poland declaring themselves LGBTQ free zones. There were many fewer demonstrations of that when European Union started withdrawing funding from for those towns.
Right.
Yeah. Bear that in mind for all those senior profs who are making a decision where to host a conference, and there are voices to host it in a hostile country. Bear that in mind, is that money always speaks. So that's important. On the other hand, I think at least events like this are important for visibility, for as I've been saying, for showing younger generations and younger people in those countries that are not so open conservative, or there are waves of extremism, that we are here and we're queer and we are here to stay. And indeed, please write to us, and I think I speak for everyone. We make it our mission to try to support younger people who might have been a little bit less lucky, or they don't know what to do, and this is very important for us. So visibility is important.
Please, yes, thanks, Paul, again. Please feel free to connect with us through a social network, email, or finding us everywhere. I'm sure you've heard different opinions, and I'm sure all the panelists can answer private questions outside this panel. I see a question in the question and answer. Then maybe some of the panelists can answer. Does anyone have an advice for managing medical leave for transition-related care? I'm currently struggling with finding a balance between maintaining my privacy and not overshading while still getting accommodation for leave, but also I'm excited, happy, and looking forward to aspects of life post-surgery. I feel it feels strange not to acknowledge that. Bittu, I saw you were writing.
Joni, do you want to go ahead and then I can go?
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually don't have I don't have a lot to say, Bittu. I mean, in the US, it's classed as a, you know, required medical procedure. So you get medical leave just as you would for any other medical issue. Yeah, so I don't have a lot that I can add, really.
So the only thing I would add is if you're in a place where that's not, you know, for that matter, when I was at Harvard, you know, these surgeries were not classified at the time as, you know, one couldn't get insurance to cover these and so on. So I remember as part of the Trans Task Force fighting for Harvard to implement these policies. So from a time when these policies were not in many places to continuing to be in many spaces where they're not in place, if they're not in place already at your workspace, we'll fight to get them in there, right? And if you're the only trans person in that space, that's fine. There are many of us in other spaces who can connect with you, who can share policies. Often when there's a template for a policy, it makes it easier for to push those policies through. So that's all I would say is that, you know, I hope that this becomes part of policy so that you don't have to struggle with this individually. But if you do, that's fine. We're with you and we'll push it through and make sure that we set a precedent for all of the other trans folk who will benefit from such a provision further down the line.
Yeah, thanks. We have very few minutes. We would like, before wrapping up, are there any comments or that you saw in the question and answer that you would like to address before adjourning the panel?
The questions that Farhad made and Hiba, one about being a medical student, right? And the other one was whether our achievements of science affected our desire of coming out, right? So I was a medical student, and honestly, yes, I had issues thinking of being a doctor and being a gay doctor, and that really discouraged me from being a clinician, and that's why one of the reasons I moved to science, right? I think in my experience, the best is to just, if possible, to come out as early as possible in life.
Yes.
That's why we feel less, once we come out to our colleagues and friends and classmates and everybody, it's easier to make decisions in life and be less worried about being an LGBT person, right? And coming out. So I understand what my colleague said. It's difficult, there could be some safety issues, but if it's possible to just come out to make people know that who we are, it's useful, even for our life plans. Yeah.
Yes, thank Jose. And I saw that the time is limited. Someone, Kevin especially, who has been, and the audience has been extremely interactive. I mean, Kevin says, next time we should do a 2-hour panel because it's very interesting. Well, I agree with them. And you've been all fantastic panelists, and I'm sure the audience has loved you and your stories, and will continue connecting. And please consider joining ALBA Network for mentorship, but also for suggestions and to connect with brain scientists. And before adjourning, I would like to thank all the panelists and the attendees that I know are numerous here. And if you need any information about ALBA, you can see in the chat there are some suggestions coming up. And so again, thank you for attending. Thank you all the panelists for sharing their stories and challenges and success, because they are successful people in science, as you say, so as you see now. And thanks to ALBA Network for hosting, and FENS Regional Meeting for having us here today. Thanks everyone for attending. Bye.